Welcome to Triangle BNI. Today's show is brought to you by Oak City Tech. We talk all the time, folks, about the loud and crowded digital marketing world, and most of us need help. We need help from professionals like Drago and his team at Oak City Tech, whether you want to do website, social media posting, uh, web content, email campaigns, anything like that. You need pros like the folks at Oak City Tech. So go to oakcitytech.com, tell them what you're looking for. I know they'll be able to help. Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Manning. Each week on Triangle BNI, we bring you a local small business success story. If you're not familiar with BNI, it is Business Networking International, the world's largest networking organization. Our little slice of heaven here in the Triangle, Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill. 31 chapters and about 535 members each week get together, and our goal is to help our fellow members grow their businesses. In our local small business success story today is Jeni Snider with Snider Law, comma PLLC. Let me get all that right. Jeni does estate planning, family law, and folks, there's a lot of things you're going to learn today, how you can help your loved ones. So, Jeni, good morning. Glad to have you on the show.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Everything going well so far on a Monday morning?
Yes, everything is going great. Thank you.
Wonderful. Tell me about the pictures behind you on the wall. I'm always intrigued by
Oh,
those.
so you can't see the top of them, but there's a flamingo on a skateboard and a giraffe on roller skates, and it's sort of a little bit of my personality
Yes.
on the wall. My off to my left are all the fancy degrees and more of a traditional looking wall, but I feel like behind me is sort of a little bit of my personality. You're not going to see the boring law books or trying to be intimidating. I like to sort of keep it down to earth and relatable. So
Yep. And
definitely definitely reflected, and even like the art behind me is actually a first grade thank you, like all the kids thumbprints and things, because obviously as a parent,
yep.
that's what means the most to me.
And Jeni is in RD18 Connections in Motion. They meet Thursdays at noon at the Hibernian Pub on Falls. If you ever want to meet a fun group of characters, that is a group. And the first time Jeni and I met, we did a one-to-one at Panera's in North Hills. And I realized Jeni would quickly become a friend of mine because I had to set a timer on a conversation because she and I could have talked for hours. And those are the kind of people I like hanging out with, Jeni. That one was a blast.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm usually not considered a quiet, short on words kind of person. So
Nah, those are boring. I don't get much. If I get yes, no answers, I'm like, wow, what time can I get out of here? So I would rather shorten a meeting than trying to excruciatingly lengthen a meeting.
yeah, no problem there.
All right, family law, estate planning. You've used the phrase, I've heard it before. Everybody's got an estate. They may not realize it, but most people don't have a plan. Where do we make the first mistake of why we don't have a plan?
So, Mike, first I'm going to correct you. Family law is different. Family law is considered more like the divorce,
Oh, I
all
did
that
throw that in,
stuff.
didn't I? My
Estate
bad.
planning law is a separate
Yeah, my
thing,
bad.
and I'll get. So that's the first
Well,
mistake
we
that
talk
people make.
yeah, and we talk you do you you educate us well by talking about family issues,
Correct.
and with families, I
Yes,
always
because
try to
I
lump
have a
them
real.
together, so thank you.
Yeah, because I really love to focus on families with minor children, just because I think that making sure they're going to be okay, raised in the way that you want them to be by the people that you would like for them to be raised by, and okay, no matter what, is so important, and something that's overlooked because a lot of people think of estate planning as something that 80-year-old grandmas and grandpas do, but it really starts young. As soon as you're 18, you're able to make a plan, and I really recommend that is when people start to think about who's going to make their medical decisions, who has access to their finances and things like that. And the phrase that I always say is everybody has a plan, because if you haven't planned, the state has created a plan for you.
Ah,
And it may not be what you want it to be. And oftentimes it's absolutely not. They just sort of picked something that sounded good and went with it. And I think that very few people hear what the state's plan is and go, yeah, that's exactly what I would want.
And
So
when we
it's
talk about
important to.
estate planning, usually our first thought is, oh, the money you have. And while that's part of it, then the next one is kind of what happens to the kids. But rarely do we get to life decisions, medical decisions, and things like that. And all three really are part of what you help people with.
Yeah, I think that's really overlooked, and that's sort of what you were saying about what mistakes do we make. I think the number one mistake is sort of just deciding that, like, oh, my family, there won't be conflict. When we are, I think, about 70% more likely to be incapacitated before we die. So there's this period of time where we cannot make our own decisions, financially and medically, and somebody has to make those decisions for us. And people will say, like, oh, my parents are divorced, but I totally trust them to get along when it comes to my care. And it's like, well, do you want to really risk that? Or do you want to go ahead and have those conversations with them and put something in writing and make sure that everything's okay? Because about 35% of families end up in conflict, even ones that you don't expect it. So even parents that aren't divorced. Where, especially if you're married and there's parents, and there can be conflict between what your spouse wants, versus your parents, and keeping your family out of court and out of conflict, which can be extremely stressful, time consuming, and financially a burden, is really my goal for families. And that's sort of my number one goal is, yes, I want to make sure you're all okay, but let's do it in such a way that we can keep you out of court and out of conflict, as much as we can plan for today.
And you'll see way more than most of us will ever see, but even I've seen what a $500,000 in a will can do to a family. Thankfully, not in my family, but I've seen that happen, and
Mhm.
like you said, these may be family members that love each other, but man, you put money on the table and sides are picked, aren't they?
Absolutely. And the weird thing too is it's not always $500,000 in cash, right? Sure, $500,000 in cash. You got five kids and everybody. We all know how to do math. But what if it's assets that have a sentimental value, or a particular, value to some but not others, or something that's not easy to sell, something that, an heirloom that's going to go in someone's house, and now you're picking and choosing, and people have to decide. And so having that plan in place and having your family on board, and having someone, an attorney even, walk you through that process on how to create that harmony and plan that goes forward is really important. I mean, some families, it's okay with the will, and then they go to the storage unit, and that's where they start arguing over what's been left in there. And you hear the stories, and they're really heartbreaking, because these are families that might have gone, every single Sunday for years, that they get together and there's barbecues and harmony and everyone loves each other, and then mom dies, and suddenly there's so much conflict, nobody speaks to each other, and the only time they do interact is through lawyers and courts. And that is not what that person would have wanted for her children.
And
So.
a lot of people will say, "Oh, no, no, mom and I talked about that. And that's, while it's a wonderful conversation to have, doesn't hold up. And I've actually heard people say when it comes to end of life decision, oh, my spouse knows what I want done. And even
Mhm.
that's not enough, is it?
I personally do not think it's enough, because in the moment, it can be extremely stressful and an added burden to your family and your spouse, especially if they themselves are also ill or elderly, or kind of, in and out of being able to handle their job and the kids and your care. And also the stress of other family members telling them what they want, right? We all in our heads think it's going to go, if we don't think about all of the different things that are coming at that person while they're also dealing with your care, and the different doctors speaking with them, the nurses that are giving, there's a lot of advice and a lot of information coming in and out, and then their own grief and their own stress and their own. So really, I truly, truly, truly believe that planning is something that we do for the people we love the most. It is a gift that we give to our loved ones and our family. And so we are usually not the ones to benefit or realize the benefit of this planning. It's easy to put off. It's easy to say, yeah, tomorrow I'll get to it. But it really is something that is a gift that we give to our loved ones, so that we take away as much of that stress and pain and burden that we can.
And if everyone is healthy today and there's no conflict, we're all in our mid 40s or mid 20s or whatever it is, it's a whole lot, I won't use the word easier to make a decision, but it's is it less passionate or more rational because all of a sudden they're not rushing dad to the hospital and now we got to make a decision?
Yes. Sadly, however, that's exactly when it's the easiest to put off
Mhm.
and think that you have time.
Yep.
And so there is a little bit of that balance of understanding the importance of it. That's the key. As soon as someone understands the importance of it, they're ready to plan. I've had people, kick their appointment. Oh, I'm busy this month. Let's move it. Let's move it. Let's move it. And then they'll reschedule and keep it. And I'll say, well, what made you keep it now? And it's, well, I just had two unexpected deaths in the family. And now I see the importance of planning. And I would love for people not to have to experience the pain of going through a loved one who hadn't planned in order to see the value of their own planning. But oftentimes that is what motivates us. Pain is a big motivator. They say that about health too. People wait until they actually have a health crisis in order to change their diet or change their exercise. And it's the same thing, I think, with estate planning as well.
My
Just
brother and sister and I each have 2 kids, and when our first ones were born, we laid out pretty quick who was gonna get the kids, and that
mhm.
took a lot of pressure off everybody because I don't wanna go on a rant about anybody's local government, Jenny, but if you really want your local government to decide who gets custody of your kids and how they're gonna be raised, I think that's just a bad decision.
I agree, and especially because I do think courts. I do think courts try their best. They
Mhm.
use a what's best for the child standard. So you can nominate guardians. We call it the guardian nomination, but ultimately it is going to be the courts that do decide where the kids go because you can actually nominate someone who ends up not being the best choice for them. It could be someone who's going through a very tough time, a health crisis, an addiction, bankruptcy, things like that, where maybe that isn't the best for the children and you wouldn't want that, and you're not around anymore to change that. So we do want that sort of stopgap with the courts. But the problem with not planning at all is that the courts have to use their best guess as to what you would have wanted and what's best. So if you do, let's say you didn't plan and you do have your two siblings, and one of them is single, never married, no kids, but you have a very close relationship with them and you really would want your kids to go there. And your other sibling is married, couple of kids, has that sort of nuclear family going on. The courts might look at that and say, you know what, that would be where it's best for the kids to go. And maybe they don't know what you know, which is you don't like how they discipline, you don't like how they handle money, you don't like how they speak to each other. There's a lot of, uh, just bad language in the house and yelling and screaming and a situation that you feel it would be stressful for your children. And they don't know that. And so they're making the decision based on what they think is best without any feedback from you. So I do think that guardian nomination is so important. About 70% of parents uh, do not legally and formally name guardians for their children. So it's something that's missing in our society for sure. That needs to. That's my goal, right? I'm
Yeah,
like, my goal is like, let's get 100% of children, with a plan,
yeah.
um,
Now
one family at a
yeah,
time.
and I usually talk when I talk to people, there's a reason why they chose the field they're in. How did you get into this?
Honestly, so for me, there's a couple of things that I really love about estate planning. I think that, first of all, it's a puzzle. You're getting all the different pieces. You're getting the laws, you're getting the tax laws, state laws, income tax laws, gift tax laws, things like that, in addition to families and their assets and their dynamics. So you have these different puzzle pieces that are slightly tweaked and slightly different for families. And it's really kind of helping people to put it all together to make a nice picture that they're very happy with and that that they know that everything's going to work out, or at least we do the best we can to plan for that. And what drew me to it is the one-on-one nature of it. I have done in the past, big law and even medium-sized firm law where you have these clients and oftentimes corporate, and that's great and I love the work, but I was really missing the heart and the soul. And I know that sounds sappy and people think that lawyers don't have any heart and they don't have any soul, but I do. And it really bothered me that I couldn't look my clients in the eye and really see the difference between, not having my assistance and my work done for them. And then what happens when they're signing all their documents and the difference in their lives and the difference in their future. So to me, it's the one-on-one nature, helping families and just really making a difference in the community. I do a lot of community service with my children, really, being out there in Raleigh and in this area. Um, and to me, that makes the biggest difference, is actually participating in the well-being of the community at large. So that really excites me, to be honest. And with COVID too, it's been really extra important for me. Over 200, I want to say this current statistic is over 215,000 children in the US have lost a primary guardian, primary caretaker, due to COVID. And that's just COVID, right? That's not, everybody. And so just thinking about those children and about what their lives would look like going forward, it's just really important to, again, teach families how important proper planning is.
And I get to come across a lot of small business owners, and a lot of them enjoy helping. And I think if I may classify your previous court legal life before this, you were helping those corporations, right? You do good work, you're helping them, but something along the way makes them change from I'm helping to I want to make a difference. And a lot of times it's something that happened in their life, or uh, something happened to a friend of theirs. And then all of a sudden, they are like, I want to shift into this, much like you've done.
Yeah, I think one story that always stands out in my head when I was doing commercial real estate was being told I needed to find, there was a family that was using their apartment like they had people sleeping in the closets. And they normally would have to give 30 days notice for evacuation. But there was this was out in Los Angeles. There was a law that under like the fire department can kick you out. They can give you 3 days notice if you're using rooms that aren't bedrooms as bedrooms, and because of the fire hazard. And I had to help try to kick that family out in 3 days. And I want to cry thinking about it, because I was like, wait a second, do you understand why these people are using closets as bedrooms? Right? These people clearly have nowhere to go. And so that to me was a big factor in really shifting my take. It's not about just pushing money around and helping corporations and whatever. It really was about making sure that people are okay. That was a big thing for me. And I think too, like, just that idea of estate planning is not a one and done thing. My parents had a plan from 2002. They paid about $6,000 for it, and none of it is applicable today. They don't own the same companies. They don't own the same assets. They don't even live in that state. They didn't have grandchildren at the time. And so it's also just helping people understand that planning is not a one and done thing. You don't just write a will, put it on a shelf to collect dust for the rest of your life and never review it again. This is something that changes with your life, changes with the laws, changes with where you live and what you have, and it's just updating that and making sure that it's going to work when your family needs it.
Yeah, it's kinda like when we have insurance people on the show, and they'll tell stories about one of their clients sold a car 4 years ago, and they're still getting billed for it, and they call one day, it's like, "Why are you still charging me for this car I sold 4 years ago? Did you call me and
Mhm.
tell me you sold it 4 years ago?" So
Yes, exactly, exactly. And I think too, the biggest thing we talked about this too, like the idea of the lawyer, like going to an estate planning lawyer versus someone else. And I've seen estate plans that have been written by criminal lawyers. I've heard advice given by real estate attorneys, and it's not always bad advice, of course. But once in a while, there is something that is inaccurate and not the best. And I always, my analogy, as you know, is that's like going to the knee surgeon for eye surgery. They're both doctors, they're both surgeons, but you clearly understand when you're talking about medicine that it's not the same thing. That you would want to go to the specialist, and it really is just someone who um, understands and has seen the different things that can go wrong, and therefore has learned to plan for it. And I think this is the same thing with DIY as well. People think, well, why do I need you? I can go online and write a will for $29.95.
mm,
And it's that, yes, you don't even need a contractor to build your house, but if you want to guarantee it's not going to fall down on your head, and it's kind of insured if it does, then you're not going to DIY that. And we see that in certain things. We know we're not going to DIY certain things, but people think that in this realm you can. And again, you're just taking the same risk that if you're trying to build a house or do your electric or whatever. So
yeah,
it's kind of the same. It doesn't seem the same, but in my humble
yeah,
opinion,
and
it's important to consult with professionals.
right, because you can go online, and there's a couple websites we don't need to mention that do that, and the information there is correct, but it's not always complete. And that's where you
Right.
versus a realtor, or the realtor versus you, If somebody's wanting to sell a house, could they call you and, "Hey, Jenny, can I run a couple things by you?" Sure, it's correct, but is it complete? And so I love that analogy. The first time you ran that by me about the need to get going to an eye doctor for that, you're like, you know what? That kinda made
It
sense
just
as soon
seems
as you
so
said that.
obvious that we know we would never do that. If you
Yes.
have a heart problem, you go to a cardiologist. If you have a knee
Yep.
problem, you go to the orthopedist. And we there is this misconception, and I think a lot of it comes from television, obviously, and movies, right?
Mm.
I was recently watching Suits. It was a little hard to get through. There's a lot of inaccuracies in the law there, but one of them is so funny. I mean, everything is resolved in a day, and they're handling murder cases, civil cases, M&A, contracts, family law, estate planning, like all at the same time. And it's just, yeah, there are generalists, absolutely,
Mhm.
but certainly oftentimes that generalist is, going to co-counsel with someone or just take cases that are a little bit less complicated. Once it gets to a certain level, you really do need someone who specializes in it. Just like you can go to an internist for your medicine,
Mhm.
but once it gets a little more complicated, you are going to be farmed out to a specialist. And the same, you mentioned real estate. You can try to sell your house on your own.
Mhm.
Same thing. People try to save money by selling their house on their own, not realizing the value that a realtor brings to the equation. Whether it's safety concerns, things you didn't even know to ask, things you didn't know to know, and that's probably the number one feedback I get during I give a 2-hour initial consultation, which is very educational, right? And just kind of go, here's what you have, here's what you might want, and kind of do you want to bridge the gap? And the number one feedback that I get is I didn't even know what I
Yeah.
didn't know.
Yep.
I didn't even know to think about these things. And so that's really the cost, right? $29.95 might get you a will that may or may not work when your family needs it. It's about the service, the expertise, the education, and the guidance.
And
That's
also,
really the
yeah,
cost of estate planning.
and when things change, you're
Hmm.
adjusting correctly again, completely, not correctly, which is good, but you're getting the complete change and refocus. Like I said, with grandkids,
Yeah.
and you mentioned your folks sold a business. Okay, well, that changes everything. And then they move to another state. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
geez.
Oh, yeah. Their current plan, well, before I made them change it,
Yes.
their plan from 2002 said, they're going to be buried in Queens in a particular lot. And now they live in Florida. And I was like, I'm sorry to tell you this, but I'm not putting your body on a plane
Yeah.
to Queens. That's not happening. And if it's the second, if the first one of you goes and you want to ship that body to Queens, that's great, but I will not be doing that. But then I realized, I'm like, wait, their will says that I'm legally obligated to follow that unless I start
Yeah.
fighting that in court. And nobody lives in Queens. No one's going to be able to visit that body. It's just, or that grave. It just really is this sort of insanity, that we don't even think to change. And I'll tell you the other thing, Mike, that really bothers me about that 2002 plan is they never heard from that attorney again.
Yep.
That's the other thing that really upsets me. When people come to me and they say, I have a 15-year-old plan from a different state, is it still good? And the answer to every legal question is it depends, right? Let me take a look at it. I do offer a 50-point review for people who already have a plan in place so that they can see what they have, what I think they might need, or what's not applicable. And they can decide for themselves whether that plan is good enough for them now or they'd like to change it. But if that attorney has never called you back in 15 years, so you just spent all that money and it's never been updated and you've never heard from that attorney, to me, that is a failure to support that client long term. And so I actually built into my firm that every 3 years, at a minimum, that there is a plan review to make sure that what you have in place will work, and that it's something that you still want in place, whether there's been a life change or a legal change. I mean, the laws change all the time. I mean, it's the dizzying feat to try to keep up with all of it. But that's why, again, that you hire professionals to do
Yeah.
that.
And when I talk to small business owners, a lot of times I'll ask them, "Are you transactional or are you relational?" And it sounds like your parents' attorney was transactional.
Yes, and that is actually very, very common.
Mhm. Yep.
Yep, created your will for you. Bye, see ya.
Yeah.
And they kind of rely on the client to decide that they need a review or whatever. And that's kind of for me, all my plans are flat fee, so there's no surprises. I want my clients to feel comfortable with calling me with changes or questions, so that they don't have to worry. Well, is this $100 question? Because if I
Yeah.
talk to Jenny for 15 minutes, I'm going to get a bill in the mail. And so I don't do that to my clients because I do want them to contact me, ask the questions, make sure that their plan's okay. And, and with that is also that I include in that initial flat fee price to make sure that they get a review every 3 years. If they want something sooner than that, there's a membership that they can join, but really every 3 years, I just think it's the minimum thing that I can do to service my clients. I absolutely want it to be relational. I really am invested in my clients' well-being. Like it really means a lot to me, and it's important to me that their families are going to be okay. I sort
And
of take them on as extended family.
good. And when speaking of family, when you're talking about your folks, I just connected something, and music and movie people will get this. Are you Jenny from the Block?
That's what my neighbors call me.
Love that. So any
I
Jennifer
wish I was
Lopez
J Lo.
fans,
She's looking
she's
good.
J Lo's Jenny from the Block. So now you know another Jenny from the Block. So
That's
yeah,
right. My neighbors would agree with you. That's my nickname in my neighborhood over here.
nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think that making sure that that's what, the whole thing about community. And I'll tell you, you talk about grandparents. I mean, well, I'm not a grandparent yet, but I've got kids, and what they bring to this entire equation is the realization that everything that I do is for them,
Yep.
and that what we do is for our kids. And truthfully, many times people only even want to sit in front of me because they're worried about their children.
Yep.
It's not about themselves, not realizing that their own incapacity and their own well-being going forward, who's in charge of them as a guardian, they can't make their own decisions. That's also important too. I mean, I don't want to depress you too much, but I mean, there's certainly stories about what happens when even siblings are fighting over mom's care or dad's care, and one's skimming off the top, and then they end up in a home, and then they want to take them out of a home, put them in a cheaper home so they could, there's all sorts of crazy stuff that you want to protect yourself as well. But really what motivates people to do the planning, sit in front of me and go through it, and really, unfortunately, have to go through that process of thinking of worst case scenarios and destruction and death, really is their own children and making sure their kids are okay.
Yep. And your college career started at Dartmouth. You have a
Yes.
BA in French. Are you truly bilingual?
It's a little rusty. I graduated college in 1996. So it's been a hot minute since I had to speak French, only French. But I think if I went to France,
Okay.
it would come back pretty quickly. For sure, it's in there. It's in there.
I like that.
Yeah, I love language. My mom speaks 5 languages. My
Oh,
dad
wow.
speaks 3. They always spoke Russian in the home. English wasn't spoken, amongst my family. And so I love language and accents and different things. That's something that I've always had an interest in.
Well, I always like having folks on the show that provide a first. And if I've got this right, I'm going to read off the bio you sent me. You
Okay.
were a manager at a family-owned publishing business. It was the oldest Russian language newspaper in the world until it
Yes.
closed. Over 100 years it was in business?
It was, yeah. So that's actually, like, I know it's really funny. Like, my parents are from the former Soviet Union. My dad's actually Ukrainian, and my mom's from Moldova. But they were, when they were born, it was Soviet Union, and they ended up here kind of separately as teenagers, but met the first day my mom came to the United States, and they ended up married. My dad was got this job at a Russian language newspaper. It was one page folded in half a couple of times. And I think he was 18, and the next youngest person was like in their 50s. So he was kind of treated as a gopher. And with the work ethic that he has, and certainly has passed down to his family, he worked 7 years, 7 days a week without a day off. So if he had the flu, he went to work. If he had the day off, he went to work, figured out who wasn't there and did their job. And he ended up the owner. And at some point, especially in the 80s, when there was an influx every couple of years of immigration, Russian immigration, I mean, that it was, like the New York Times with multiple sections and, 70, 80 pages, and highly respected. And so that was really, our family's pride and joy. And then obviously the internet is sort of like video killed the radio star. The internet and, publishing didn't go hand in hand. And eventually, as he was looking to retire, they closed it down at 100 years old. But it was started in 1910 by Russian emigres that were anti-revolution. So it was always anti-communist. And so as the Cold War and all that, it continued to be anti-communist. And it was basically Western news that could be read in the Soviet Union because it was in Russian. And so the
Wow.
U.S. government obviously took advantage of that, and we certainly took advantage of that. So
And
it was very exciting.
this was in New York?
It was based out of New York City, And so obviously we didn't start it. It didn't start out as a family business. It was started in 1910, and I think my dad, it would have been in the 60s, I believe, that he started working there. I'm trying to do the math. I think it was the 60s. And yeah, and it's allowed him to, it's funny, he was just showing, I don't even know if this is, bad or good, but he was showing my kids that he had spoken to Putin several times and had pictures with him. And I feel like it's back before he became this, megalomaniac, but certainly my parents have very colorful stories, and I've grown up with that, and sort of take that with me. I think that life is a series of stories and experiences,
Yes.
which is actually why I also build that into my estate planning. It really isn't just about passing assets and who's going to take your kids, but there's also a legacy component. And it is about your stories, your values, your life lessons, and what you want your family to remember you by. And certainly I've conducted, interviews with my own family to make sure that some of these awesome stories, I mean, we had like the KGB tried to blow it up. And it was totally like in the movies. They bungled the job, ended up injuring themselves and getting caught because they had to get medical care. I mean, all sorts of crazy stories. So
Nice. Is your Russian better than your French these days?
no. No, because I always joke I'm a lover, not a fighter, and French is the language of love. Russian has vowel sounds that don't exist in English, and six cases, three genders, totally different alphabet. So it's I can say a few things for sure, but it's rusty these days for sure.
And you said your mom met your dad the first day she was on US soil?
Yes. So do you want to hear the
I
story?
do.
Okay. So you couldn't leave the Soviet Union in the 50s. It was completely closed 100%. They had one loophole. If you were originally Polish, and this is a story I've been told. So if someone out there says that's not true, I'm sorry. This is my parents' story. So you could go back to Poland. If you ended up in the Soviet Union because of World War II, you could go back to Poland. And of course, we're talking about war-torn Poland, like right after the war. But both of my grandfathers were Polish. So separately, my parents ended up in Poland. My dad came earlier to the US. My mom came 2 years later. And when she came, she had to, they went to Israel first. And so she came from Israel, not Poland. And she had to fly while her rest of her family took the boat. And she gets here, she's staying with a family she doesn't, she knew, everyone kind of was doing the same sort of circuit. And they said, do you know the family down the street? They lived in the same town as you in Poland. And she was a child, 6, 7 years old in Poland. She said, no, I don't know them. And the family said, well, let's go over there. We'll meet them. And, you can kind of play the name game with them. And sure enough, it was my dad. And at first she wasn't into him. I think he was like the kind of guy who dated twins. And she was a good girl, but he won her over, and they've been married for 54 years this year.
Wow. And
So
how old was your mom when she came over?
it was her 17th birthday.
Okay.
It was her fourth country, her 17th birthday, and her fifth language. And she was here without her family.
Wow.
So her story, she was in fundraising for years. And let me tell you, people opened up their wallets as soon as she told her story.
Nice.
And about why she gives back to the community, because really the way that they realize that American dream really is something amazing. And I feel that, I was really the first person in, obviously, in my nuclear family that had gone to college, and the only woman and the only one with an advanced degree. And so I do take that with me as, as far as like sort of continuing that, upward sort of American, passing that on to my kids,
What was your maiden name?
My maiden name was Weinberg. It was, it's a Polish spelling, W-A as in apple, J as in Jax, N as in Nancy. Don't tell me how many times I had to say that as a kid. B as in boy, E as in Eric. Like my mom had this whole way of spelling it, but it was my grandfather's last name. And my mom never wanted to change it. And of course, we all wanted to change it. Nobody wanted to have to spell it for people. A-J is not an I sound in English. But that was my maiden name.
What was your mom's maiden name?
Her last name was Goldfarb. And then, so there were the Jewish side. And then my grandmother on my dad's side, it was the Russian side. And she actually was born in Siberia.
Jeez.
And her last name was Kuprianova. So that was the very Russian sounding.
Okay.
And I've heard from my family, they were like, her family had been like counts to the czar and that they had been killed in the revolution. And at some point, during the revolution, they took land away from everyone. And at some point, my parents were offered that land back to reclaim it for the family heirloom. I don't know, like the family estate, and my parents declined. So who knows? I could have had
Ooh,
land in
yep.
Siberia.
There you go. Just what you needed. A lot you could do to, round the calendar, a lot of things to do, right?
Yeah. Well, it's like retire at the beach or retire in
Yeah.
Siberia. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I'll tell you what, who knows with global warming, Siberia might be the new, Capri. Who knows?
Now with
Um,
3 kids, so you've got 3 kids, high school down to 5th grade.
yes,
What
my
did
little one just graduated elementary school. So
Cool.
next year I will have high school and 2 middle schoolers,
There you go.
which is great. They'll all be out of the house at 7:30 in the morning, which is nice because this past year, my youngest didn't start until 9:15. So it was kind of this big get up at 6, and then I still had 2.5 hours before they were all out. So I'm excited about middle school and the next phase of all their lives.
What part of your parents' heritage are they attracted to? What stories do they like? What questions do they
My
ask?
children, well, they certainly love the photos of Putin, almost too much. I think they really value the fact that it makes them a little bit different, right? Here we are, ITV Raleigh, and sort of that they play tennis and golf, and it just seems pretty, straight vanilla, and that they sort of have a little bit of this sort of, something that sets them apart and a little bit different. That they've got stories. They love my parents. They're very close with my parents, which I love, and they love hearing their stories and hearing more about the culture and the language. I've even seen my mom has written down for them sort of phonetically how to say certain things in Russian and how to read in Russian, and trying to teach them a little bit of that. And so I think that's the biggest thing, with my family, is of course keeping some of that alive. I mean, certainly they're not going to be as entrenched in the Russian culture as I was in New York City, but just knowing that that exists and knowing those stories, I think is really important to pass down to even their children. I feel like that's part of the problem with life, right? We have blood, sweat, and tears, but how many of us can name our great grandparents?
Yeah.
And certainly our great great grandparents, forget it, right? And so all those stories and all that blood and shed, and all of that drama, I would love to create a way to make sure that that amazing story and that amazing journey that they went through, and even my grandparents, same thing. I mean, surviving World War II and what they had to go through. Like, I want those stories to stay in the family forever.
What is your favorite story from St. Anne's High School?
St. Anne's is a special, special place. I just actually went to my 30th high school reunion. St. Anne's sounds parochial, sounds strict. It was non-parochial, come as you are, no dress code, teachers by their first name, no grades.
Wow.
It was extremely liberal. I went on a Spanish trip senior year, and I mean, even the chaperones were giving us whiskey. And I mean, it was really, so I think the biggest thing that I would say about St. Anne's is it's a place for self-starters, self-learners, and people who love to learn, because there are no grades. And so I was able to take Spanish literature, French literature, ancient Greek. I was able to explore education and learning for learning's sake, and
Yep.
not studying just to get the grade. And so that, to me, is the greatest gift that I got from St. Anne's, was the ability to really learn. I've always made the joke that I was the smartest I ever was in high school, because once you get to college and it matters the grades, and it matters to sort of narrow down your education and your learning and your focus, so that sort of greater global focus of just learning for learning's sake. I definitely consider myself a lifelong learner, and I think that's the biggest gift that I got from St. Anne's.
How do
But yeah,
you
it's a quirky school. I
Yeah.
mean, I gotta
Yeah.
tell you, the headmaster, he would use like 30-letter words. I was like, who knew what he was even talking about? But it just sounded good.
Did they just graduate everybody that enrolled?
So it was very hard to get in. You had to have an IQ test. If you didn't pass, you didn't get in. Now the bigger problem is, not only do they have testing, but it's full. There's a shortage of
Well,
spots.
yeah, no
And
grades.
that, huh?
No grades. I bet there's a waiting list.
Yeah, no, but it wasn't. Yeah. Not everyone liked that about their kids. It wasn't for everybody. My brother probably would have done better at a different school. He was an athlete. He was a big tennis person, and he really did need the grades to stay on track. I think there are kids that really need that, right? It keeps them on track. It's like there's this consequence to not learning this, reading this, writing this paper on time and whatnot. But for someone like me, that I actually enjoy learning, My friends all know. They'll call me up random questions and they say, I'm calling you because you know everything.
Good.
You'll know. And I was like, no, I don't know. I just know how to Google. And I'm willing to take the time to do that and learn it and read it. I'm the one who reads the contracts head to toe. I'm the one who reads the waivers on, a manual for something, I'll read it. It's just in my nature to do so. It's like my nerdy side, which is probably why I have the whimsical art behind me. It's like,
Yes.
I'm a nerd, but I'm a fun nerd.
How do you balance that with your kids who do go to a structured school, but you want them to be a lifelong learner?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one because I do see that my daughter, for example, straight A student, does really well. She's an athlete. She does really well. She really amazes me. I always say that she's the best of me and her dad put into one. But odds are she's not grabbing a book to read by the beach just for fun. She's only going to do it for school. So to me, I think the biggest thing is to teach by doing. Is the only way to really do that. They're always going to sort of focus on what they want, and they're all three of them are so different, and they all have big hearts, which is great. But they all see the world, speak about the world, and handle school differently. But it really, for me, I think the biggest thing is talking to them about lifelong learning, about reading people, and getting to know people. And as I said, we all participate in community service, and that's really important. So I think it's just learning by teaching by doing, and doing with them so that they can see the importance. Same thing with travel and learning other cultures is so important to me. And I think just taking them and showing them different places, different cultures, and being adventurous, how important that is.
And part of in my life, at least part of different things to learn, and you're a big fan of concerts. You can
Yes. Oh
learn a
my
lot.
gosh.
So what was your first concert you went to, and did your parents know you were going there?
So I think I don't know if it's the first, I think it was the first. At 12, I believe it was, my uncle took me to see the Rolling Stones at Yankee Stadium.
At
And we were probably
12.
sixth row. And back then they didn't have guidelines for how loud the speakers could go. Now I think they actually care about hearing loss a little bit. But back then, I mean, you would be deaf for 2 days.
Yep.
And then by the time I was about 14, we actually knew the owner of Ticketmaster. And this is Fred Rosen, who used to own it. He gave us his private secretary's phone number. And this is back before the internet. You had to call on the phone and try to get through for tickets or stand in line for days, because being in New York City, obviously, is a big market for tickets at Madison Square Garden. And so he gave us his private secretary's number, and we would call her and get tickets to things. And, we sent her candy and flowers.
Sweet.
But that was a pretty big deal because I saw a lot of concerts that way for sure. So yeah, it was. I love live music. Honestly, when I say concerts, I mean I love everything from the biggest venues to just going to a bar with live music.
Mhm.
I have no musical talent myself. I mean, I took piano and whatever, but I can't sing, and certainly don't have that talent. But I really love it. I just love how it feels inside. It's amazing.
Can you at least dance?
When no one's watching.
Okay. Kinda like my singing when no one's listening.
I'm a little bit better than Elaine on Seinfeld, but I wouldn't call myself a dancer. I was much better at like verbal wit, like quick wit, than I am about the two
Mhm.
step, I guess.
Very nice. I have a tip for everybody. Last night, Becky and I went to see Top Gun. Wow.
Yes, wow.
Wow. I'm just gonna leave it at that. Wow.
Yeah, I
Yep.
agree. Go see it. And
Although
Jennifer Connelly went to St. Anne's.
oh, cool. Okay. I
Yes.
don't recall seeing her in anything, but she was very good. I will say that we got matinee tickets for a 5:30 show, big popcorn, bottle of water, Sierra Mist for Becky, and 2 tickets, all for $48. Like, gee, gotta be
Only
well, that's why we go to 1 movie a year.
I took my kids to the Alamo because I wanted the full dinner experience. And it was definitely more than $48, but you get a really great dinner. And I had some yummy cocktails too.
Wait, the
Um,
Alamo?
yeah, the Alamo is on New Bern Ave in
Oh, the movie
in
theater.
Raleigh. I
Okay.
like the dinner experience. And
Oh,
what I love
cool.
about that place is some of the places you can order dinner, but it has to be up front. And then when the movie starts, they won't serve you anymore. But at the Alamo, they'll serve you the whole time.
Nice.
um,
Okay.
which is great because then, when you get the bill, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, talk
Yeah.
about once a year experience, but it is worth it.
All
I
right.
highly
Well, there
recommend it.
is your entertainment tip for the day, folks, from
That's
both
right.
of us. And you need more than tips. Take care of your family. Take care of your decisions for you. So reach out to Jenny. She already told you it's a free 2-hour consult. You're going to learn a lot, and you're going to quote. If I quote you right, Jenny, they're going to learn stuff they didn't know they needed to learn. Right?
I think, yes,
Yep.
I think so. You don't know what you don't know.
Yep.
It's really important to educate yourself. We all know we have to get insurance for our house and our car. And, we know that we have to invest and file our taxes. Well, guess what? You also have to plan for your incapacity and your death. And it's just something you have to go through,
Yep. And
even if
do
you're
it
reluctant
now.
to want to
Yep.
think about death and destruction.
Yeah, and it's a very unpopular topic to have, conversation to have, but you gotta have it so it's in place, because if it's you that's passing on, your family members are gonna be distraught anyways, so make sure that's one less thing they have to worry about.
Yes, and I will say too, in closing, one of the things I've been getting too is my spouse doesn't want to talk about it. Yes, I want to plan, but my spouse doesn't want to talk about it. Every time I try to broach the subject, they cry and leave the room or whatnot. And I will tell you, you can start the process without them. That's the other thing to keep in mind. You can't write them out of your will without them, but you certainly can plan for your own incapacity, your own end of life decisions, your own will, your own vision for what you want all of that to look like. And you don't need to wait for them. And I think that's really important too. Don't let your spouse or your partner's reluctance stop you from moving forward as well. You certainly wouldn't say, oh, you don't want to get insurance on your car, so I won't get insurance on mine. And so same thing with estate planning. You want to go ahead and plan for yourself no matter what.
Folks, it's information like that you're gonna get when you call Jenny. We put her phone number on there, we've got the website on there. If you do nothing, just at least get information. Start there. Jenny, I've enjoyed it very much. I love the stories, the Russian background I did not know about you. I thought that's pretty cool, so I'm sure you and I'll have
Yeah.
more conversations on that. But
Yes.
just get some information, folks. That's all we're asking right now.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mike, for having me today. I really enjoyed it.
Good luck with everything on the rest of 2022, and we will see
Thank you.
everybody next time on Triangle BNI.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.